Okay, thank you for joining us today. My name is Laura Polari-Welbus. I'm the Executive Director of Encore Learning, and I'm just delighted to have you here with our program for Encore Learning Presents, brought to you by the Special Events Committee of Encore Learning. Just a couple of reminders. We take questions in our webinars via the Q&A module. We will have a lot of time for questions today. So they'll go in the Q&A module, and Louise will be posing those to our Congress members. So that's the way we're going to roll today. You also can turn on the live transcript, if you need that assistance. And when the webinar ends, you will be prompted to complete a survey. So be sure to do that. And with that, I'd like Louise Kenny to come on and share what's coming up with special events.
Hi, everybody. I'm Louise Kenny on the special events team. I do want to do a commercial for our special events team because we're always looking for people that are interested in identifying potential presentations and tours in the Washington area. So if you have any interest in that, please contact me and I'd love to talk to you about it. In terms of what's coming up, our course preview is Thursday, January 30th at 9:30 on Zoom. So January 30th, mark that on your calendars. The next event that's coming up is with it's not really one of our events, but we did want to tell you about it, Arlington Philharmonic pre-concert talk on Thursday, February 20th at 2 o'clock from 2 to 3. And that would be prior to their the concert, which is at Washington Liberty High School on February 23rd. So look for more information about that. And lastly, we do have a special event coming up on March 3rd at 3 o'clock, and it will be about Frances Perkins, who was in FDR's administration and did significant work helping refugees come out of Nazi Germany. So the author of the new book out on that will be here to talk to us about it. So mark your calendars, March 3rd. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Congressman Don Beyer. Congressman Beyer is, as you all know, represents the 8th district, which is the district that many of us live in. He's in his 5th term in office. And we'd like to talk to him a little bit about what's happening right now. It's kind of a funny time because we're in this transition and the inauguration is next week, but to get his perspective. And then we'd also like to talk to Congressman Beyer about some activities that he's doing separate from his day job, things that are very interesting and not everybody does. So we'd like to get his perspective on what he's done and why he's done it and what his experiences were. So Representative Beyer, would you like to get us going and chat a little bit?
Absolutely. Louise, thank you. And Laura, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. It's fun. I don't think I've ever done Encore Learning before, but I will again. By the way, I'm excited to see March 3rd. You're having the book talk on Frances Perkins. My grandmother, who was probably my primary role model, was Frances Perkins' right-hand woman for the 12 years she was Secretary of Labor. She gets credit for having recommended Frances to FDR to become our first woman cabinet secretary. So that'll be very cool. And as many of you probably know, the National Park Service, I think just recently, last month, designated the Frances Perkins Memorial up in Maine, where her original home was. So very cool. Also on the call with us is Noah Simon. I know is a longtime Arlingtonian, served on the Arlington School Board, but has the really good job right now of being the chief of staff for our district office, all constituent affairs. I found out this morning he did 3,258 cases last year in 2024. So it's lots and lots of individual people helped. So please put his name down in your Rolodex. When you need help on a passport, on Social Security payment, on an income tax refund, on getting your pastor visa from Uganda, whatever. Or just listening to his wild stories about all the different people and the needs that have come up. It may be, even in the minority, something really constructive that we can help you with on a day-to-day basis. Louise and Laura had asked, I give you the quick overview of the Hill. Right now, almost nothing's happening. The committee assignments haven't made yet in the House. I think everyone's in a state of suspense to see what happens with Donald Trump's inauguration a week from today. We understand there'll be 100 executive orders next Monday afternoon after the swearing in. I will probably hate many of them. Hopefully there'll be some good ones in there too. And then on the Senate side, where I don't play, they're obviously having an enormous amount of hard work trying to figure out whether Kash Patel should be the next secretary, next head of FBI, whether Hegseth should run the Defense Department. Will somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, who can never get a security clearance head, be the director of national intelligence, and on and on. Some of them are not going to be difficult. Burgum is the new Secretary of Interior, for example. Some will be not difficult, but probably, to my mind, dangerous. Chris Wright, who's likely to be easily confirmed as the next Secretary of Energy, is also a famous climate change denier, and is a PhD out of MIT. So he's smart enough to make a real dent, sadly, perhaps in the wrong direction. After the Los Angeles fires and so many other environmental tragedies directly related to climate change, it will be the nicest thing I can say is fascinating to have someone who doesn't believe climate change is real, or if it is real, that it's a really good thing, in charge of our energy department. So we will see what happens. I think we have already gathered the new chairs of the Arlington County Board, Alexandria City Council, Falls Church, Fairfax, and the city managers, just to talk about what a Trump administration will mean for Northern Virginia. The immediate and most obvious concern is Schedule F, which is taking the less than 2,000 political appointments that any president has, the so-called Schedule C appointments, and expanding them with Schedule F to add 50,000 more people who would serve at the pleasure of the president. This is a huge step in a backward direction, from a bill that was passed in the late 1800s, to making our federal government basically patronage jobs, basically serving the president rather than the people of the country. I can certainly understand the president's sometimes frustration with bureaucratic resistance to his orders, but they're there to serve all of us, and take direction from the president. So we will see. The danger, of course, is that many of those 50,000 will be in the greater Washington area. They're going to be the mid-level managers, the GS 15s, 16s, the SES people. They're not going to be the low-level workers, the GS 5s and 6s and 7s and 9s. So it can have a huge impact on Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Montgomery County, Prince George's County. We are very definitely worried about it. We're also concerned about the immigration stuff. He's promised to deport up to 10 million people. They're going to start with the 1 to 2 million, but as we know, Northern Virginia is extraordinarily diverse. So we have lots and lots and lots of immigrants. I know just in Alexandria, for example, the number 3 language in our public schools is Amharic, English, Spanish, and then Amharic from Ethiopia. I don't know of almost a single school. I'm sure there are a couple, but most of the schools in the district I represent will have children representing 50 different languages. So what this means is maybe the kids aren't deported, but a parent may be, a mother or a father. What this does to families, we just don't know. Most of my work is going to be around the expiration and the renewal of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which is mixed evidence about how much it stimulated the economy, but we do know that it transferred north of $2 trillion to the wealthiest 10% of our country. Right now, our income inequality is the worst it's been in the last 100 years. And I'm going to do everything I can to keep it from getting worse in the next couple of weeks with the renewal of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. We're also today looking at a $37 trillion budget deficit, more than 100% of our GDP in public debt. It's the fastest growing part of our budget right now. It's just interest on the debt. We spent more on interest on the debt last year than we did on our military budget. We spent more on interest on the debt last year than we did on Medicaid. And it's just going to get worse. But my fear is that they're going to put what the Trump plan is at the moment is to continue the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act with another $4 trillion of unpaid for benefits to the wealthiest Americans. So it's sort of two negative things at the same time, making America's wealth and income distribution ever worse, and also making our vulnerability to future financial shocks because our debt's so high even worse, and reducing the amount of money that we can spend on the American people. There's lots more, but I don't want to make this. I'm sorry to be political about it. I'm not trying to be Democrat versus Republican here, but rather what the next president has promised and what its likely impacts will be on us. But it'd be much more fun to talk about lifelong learning. I took a while to think about this ahead of time, and my lifelong journey started because I had lateral strabismus as a kid. Eye surgeries 3 times because I would have one eye looking at you and the other eye looking at Louise, which made me a pretty terrible athlete because the only kid I knew to strike out at kickball. So instead, I spent my whole childhood reading, which was wonderful for the SATs later on. What it really did was give me a great love of just discovering new things through books. And to this day, I try to set aside a lot of time to read every day. Then came wife and kids and business. But when I was running for lieutenant governor, a long time ago, maybe 35 years ago, one of the people I stopped in to see was a young man named Tom Rollins. He'd been a staffer in the Senate, and he just quit to start a little business called the Teaching Company. And I got a chance to talk to him about what the Teaching Company was. And his idea was that there were always those courses you couldn't take in college because they were oversubscribed. At my college, it was the wonderful teacher on film, and you could never get into his class. And he sent his young staffer, who happened to be Lucinda Robb Florio, another Arlingtonian, to the colleges all over the country and say, let me tape your most sought after lectures, the ones people can't get into, and put them available on cassette tape and later on videotape. Well, I started with a course on how science fiction literature had evolved and moved on to 48 courses on World War II and ended up taking 120 courses from the Teaching Company. When you're driving around the state campaigning statewide, there's not much to do between visits except listening to great courses. And it was incredibly fun and fulfilling. A few years before, I was always interested in foreign policy. I took 2 summer courses at SAIS, the Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies. I like to brag that it was the first car dealer they ever let in. But it was really fun and surrounded by people that I got to know and like. Then 15 years ago, I finally heard about Coursera and took a number of courses on Coursera online, which were free. Took one on gamification, which shows up everywhere nowadays. Another on foreign policy, and a third on artificial intelligence, which I really enjoyed. I thought was fascinating. After 3 weeks, I got the first test and I couldn't answer a single question because I didn't know how to code and I'd never had linear algebra. So I gave that up. But I also discovered there are many, many other ways to be part of a lifelong learning. I checked today, I'm on 864 days in a row on Duolingo in German. So Louise, I won't do the rest of this class in German, but it's been enormously fun. With a couple of friends, we're all competing to see who can be the first bridge life master. Another wonderful learning experience. And I had my first classical guitar lesson Saturday afternoon. I played the guitar for years, but not very well. So I figure, I got nothing else to do at age 74. I'll learn to do that. So, and the only point I would make, as I'm sure you all realize because you're on the seminar, is that every new thing we learn adds richness and diversity and fun to our lives. And when you have mastery of yet another small skill, it just gives you the sense that you can be masterful in many other places in your life. So thank you for being here today. And I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Do you sleep?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Do you ever sleep? I mean, you have mentioned a lot of activities there, and So, well, thank you, by the way, for your comments on the election. I know everybody doesn't know what's going to happen. I did have one question on that before we totally get off that. Do you yourself have any priorities that you would like to see forwarded um, relative to Northern Virginia or relative to the nation, um, separate from the president, separate from his agenda? Do you personally have any?
Yeah, I have. I don't want to take up the rest of the hour, Louise.
Yeah.
Yeah, my number one priority is to lead the effort to make fusion energy available on the grid while we are still alive. Fusion energy was discovered in the early 1930s. The science
Mhm.
is pretty easy.
Mhm.
We later recognized that's what powers the sun. So all other forms of energy ultimately come from fusion energy. But it's always been, quote unquote, 50 years away. Now we think it's 2, 3, 4 years away, maybe 7 or 8 years before we have it on the grid. I founded the Congressional Fusion Caucus. We have 110, 112 members, pushing hard for major public investments in the 40 different companies that are making fusion happen around the world. The second big
Wow.
priority has been trying to overcome the gap between the wealthiest and those left behind. You saw this in the last election. We can brag about how strong the economy is. The 4% unemployment, the more 9.1 million jobs created, the stock market at all-time highs, corporate profits at all-time highs, et cetera, et cetera. But we can't miss the fact that at least half of the Americans wouldn't know where to get $500 for a major car repair, that people are still very worried about their own personal future, and that we're the first generation in American history where our kids expect to have not as strong, not as good a lifestyle as their parents. Lifting up all Americans is a very important part of our economic leadership. And we've not been doing that very well. It's a really important priority. For example, among others, two things that I've been a co-lead on is the child tax credit. When we put it in 2021, it lifted half. It dropped our child poverty rate to 5%, the lowest in American history. It expired at the end of the year, and child poverty rate's now around 13%. We saw very clearly that child poverty is a public policy choice. It's not accidental. We can deal with it, but we choose not to. The second piece is on the whole notion of the housing availability. Once again, we have a massive housing crisis in America. You all have been part of it with the debate over the missing middle in Arlington. But we now have more Americans living alone than any time in history, not just numbers, but also as a percentage, and more Americans who find just the contemplation of buying a house completely impossible. Kamala Harris tried to address it in her campaign, but much, much more needs to be done. And
Okay, well, thank you.
Louise, a lot of other things. I have I have the best team on Capitol Hill. I say without fear of contradiction, and they're all working on many, many different issues.
Well, thank you for that just kind of overview of a few of the things that you have priority. But I did want to get into the machine learning and AI. So you're pursuing your master's degree in AI, is my understanding. So can you give us a few high-level things that you've learned about AI that you didn't know or that were surprising to you about how it works? We all know kind of conceptually how it is, but can you share some insights?
Yeah, Louise, it's sort of a backdoor. I was touring George Mason's new innovation center in Arlington 3 years ago, and they showed me their innovation lab, and I was like, I remember my Coursera course I had to drop out of, and just threw out the idea that could I take courses here, and they said, well, maybe. So I've just finished my 7th course in computer science. And I found it enormously fun. I love the young people I'm surrounded by. I'm really impressed by how smart they are and how disciplined. I sort of remember college being, well, a lot of people worked hard, but we also spent a lot of time playing. These kids don't seem to play at all. They study and they go to work and then they come study some more. However, I can't claim any special insight into AI through my coursework. I'm still, no better than a senior computer science major. However, what it did was give me an entree to be part of the 24-person artificial intelligence task force on the Hill, appointed by the speaker and our Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries. So we was part of that all last year. For a couple of years before that, I co-chaired the Artificial Intelligence Caucus. So I've had the chance to have really deep dives with some of the smartest people in the world, sometimes some of the most dangerous people in the world on AI, from Sam Altman to Mark Andreessen to Stuart Russell. I was part of a book party last night with Sayesh Kapoor, the young man who wrote the book AI Snake Oil. And so lots and lots of insights into what's happening with artificial intelligence. Some very good. Its impact on our healthcare is astonishing. Every day, there's something new that's happening in healthcare because of artificial intelligence. To the other side, there's also an explosion in pornography, especially child pornography, so-called CSAM, child sexual assault material, that we're really having a difficult time dealing with. We have the issue of generative AI, Claude and GPT-4 and Gemini and things like that, that are making people's work lives much more productive. But they're also generating lots of hallucinations. They tell you stuff that's not true. Finding responsible ways to use it. There's lots of yin and yang in this. It's going to be very tough to put the genie back in the bottle. So many of the people at the very top, like an Eric Schmidt or Sam Altman, say we need regulation, but not now. I think it was St. Augustine who did the same kind of thing. Make me pure and holy, but not yet. On the other hand, our task force came up with a lot of very good bills. One of my proudest is on regulating the large language models like Claude and GPT-4 to make sure that they test their models ahead of time. We don't let the FDA put drugs on the market without testing them extensively, that they disclose what the materials are trained on. One of the big challenges with artificial intelligence is bias. We know about the bias against women, the bias against people of color, and facial recognition technology, and who to recommend for jobs. Because if you train on one set of data, that's what you're going to get coming out, garbage in and garbage out. And I see the primary role of Congress is to do our best to create guardrails on the downsides, the real risks of AI. At the same time, trying to enjoy the extraordinary benefits that are going to come in terms of medicine, science, even the management of our society.
So Congress is actively pursuing bills regarding AI. I mean, it's not just a theoretical. There's real legislation being proposed.
Well, Louise, one of the things we've been very embarrassed by the fact that we passed one bill in the last 25 years on social media, and that was a bill to make it impossible to sue them, to hold them responsible, or the terrorists who use their sites to coordinate, or the child pornography, or the drug sales, or it's the Wild West. We're trying not to do that with artificial intelligence. We actually, our little task force agreed on 13 bills, unanimously bipartisan. Everyone co-signed everyone. Most were reported out of the Science Committee, but for some unknown reason, the Speaker Johnson didn't allow them to come to the floor before the end of the year. So we start over. We are going to have to overcome a tendency among some in Congress that any regulation is too much regulation, that we should be completely no touch rather than light touch. And sadly, we know that markets are not perfect, and that there will be people who abuse it badly if there's no regulation at all. But yes, we were actively working on legislation, and we'll try to do much more in the years to come, in the next year.
Do you find that you're educating yourself about it? Are other members of Congress also educating themselves, or is it they're kind of trying to pick it up as they go along?
I think they're educating themselves about artificial intelligence policy, not about the science or the mathematics. And I'm not sure. I mean, I really enjoy it, and it's fun, and it makes me feel more fulfilled. I don't know that it contributes to my contribution to the AI policy discussion. It gets me in the room, but I don't know that it makes me maybe a little bit smarter. The other two, the co-chairs of the AI task force, are a Republican from California who has a master's in machine learning from Caltech, and a Democrat from California who majored in computer science at Stanford. Again, for both of them, their knowledge is 20 years old or 30 years old, but they're good policy people and they work well together.
I just lost my train of thought on it. Is there a difference between machine learning and AI, or is it the same thing?
No, machine learning is sort of the basis of artificial intelligence. Machine learning, more than anything else, is built on pattern recognition. That if a computer, by scanning things in, by breaking down a picture of Louise Kenny into pixels, I forget how many are across and how many down, and then they see 1,000 pixelated versions of Louise Kenny, and each pixel has a mathematical value. At a certain point, they can actually create a picture of Louise Kenny from all the knowledge that they've had. And you can use that in many, many different ways. The one probably most obviously talked about is the scanning of X-rays, where if you scan in right now, they've scanned in millions of X-rays on things like breast cancer and brain cancer and bladder cancer. But just take breast cancer and say, these are X-rays that show a known cancer. These are X-rays that show no cancer. And already computers are very good at being able to detect breast cancer in an X-ray. So then you extend that not just to something like a visual image, but to language itself. And that was really what ChatGPT was trying to do, was to scan in lots and lots and lots of languages and sentences. We all see this. Artificial intelligence is everywhere in our lives today, but once we understand it, we don't call it artificial intelligence anymore. For example, if we're on our computer and we say, thank, and then fills in you, or we type THAN and it fills in the K, that's just early machine learning. It learns that when you type thank, it's like you is likely to come. So spell check is just an early version of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So the real breakthrough was when they decided to mimic the human brain, which is, billions of neurons each connected to each other. And they created neurons, electric neurons in a computer one at a time, and then connected them to each other and used those to create the learning pathways. The way it works in the brain is if, Louise, you have two neurons, and that link between the two of them is the phrase thank you. The more often you say thank you, the thicker that connection becomes. So the same, and if you almost never use, merci vielmal, that thin's going to be very, very thin. It's the same way in the computers, that instead of the thickness of the cable, it's a mathematical weighting when it happens more and more often. And as a consequence, I think they were surprised when they turned on GPT-3 that it could write whole paragraphs. And as you apply it to visual learning, they feed in enough films that can create film, that can create all kinds of images. It just gets more and more powerful every single day.
Okay. Well, how much are you halfway through your program? Your master's?
Next Wednesday, I start the eighth course with 10 more to go after that.
So you're almost halfway there.
No, yeah, halfway there. Yeah. But I think the most time I can afford is one course per semester. So I'm still 4 or 5 years away.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll talk to you in 5 years, and when you're truly an expert on it, and the world will have evolved so much. So I have a number of questions here, but they all tend to have something to do with your day job and politics. So before we go back to that, I wanted to hear a little bit about your exciting adventure on the Appalachian Trail. What made you want to do it? What was your experience?
Very exciting. I went to school in Williamstown, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And the Appalachian Trail runs right through Williamstown. And one of the things that you do that first weekend of freshman year is you go climb Pine Cobble, which is one of the mountains you can see from campus. And so, I was doing that a little bit, but then sophomore year, Richard Nixon bombed Cambodia and invaded it. And Kent State happened, and all the schools, at least all the schools in New England, just shut down. Kids wouldn't go to class, teachers wouldn't teach. So we decided to hike home on the Appalachian Trail, going all the way to Harper's Ferry and down the towpath. That only lasted a week before it fell apart. We were young, stupid, somebody fell, but it stayed on my lifelong list of goals. And I was always going to do it when my kids grew up, but I kept having children, and I discovered leaving for 6 months to hike the Appalachian Trail was not healthy for a happy marriage. So a friend suggested I start doing it in 5 and 6 day chunks. So I started in 2002 with 5 days, and it took me 22 years, 90 different people, 2,187 miles. So I finished October 18th.
Wow.
With a 5-mile section in Vermont. And
Congratulations.
it was wonderful fun. My only bragging right is, to the best of everyone's knowledge, I'm the first member of Congress to ever finish the Appalachian Trail. And I made
Congratulations.
an enormous number of great new friends. You spend a week on the trail with somebody, cooking together, camping together, helping them up and down mountains. You either like them or you don't.
Were these
A lot of
personal
wonderful
friends of
people.
were these personal friends of yours, or who were these people? Because 90 is a lot of people.
Yeah, I think only one was a friend ahead of time. And he actually ran one of the dealerships. So my wife's theory was the only people that would come with me were people that I paid, and were on the payroll. But in the meantime, I in an evangelist sense, I love my trail experiences, so I'd talk about it. And if anybody ever expressed an interest, I'd put them on the list and invite them. And so if 90 people came, I probably invited 500. And many of the 90 only came one time. And once was enough. But there are others who would come again and again and again.
So you would then say, I'm walking it the first week in July, and then who's ever available want to join me? Is it the way
I
it works?
usually have an invite list of 40 to 45 people, and I'd lay out the 5 or 6 or 3 or whatever day schedule where we were going to stay, if we had to camp or not. And then, sometimes, in July, I had 2 Arlingtonians, Joan Kelsh and her son Tucker, and a guy from Williams who I never met before, who emailed me online and flew in from Salt Lake City. And we had 7 great days up in the Maine mountains. But then when I went in October and said, this is my last trip, I had 15 people with me. So it varied a lot. But I say on average 1 or 2, which is nice.
Nice.
I did have, by the way, 2 wonderful Arlington twins who went to Yorktown, who started at age 13. And both of them were track stars at Yorktown. And they would be the ones on the long 15-mile days when it got dark, who would get to camp, drop their pack, and come back and take the packs from the old guys.
Cool. I don't know much about it. I know my husband did a brief piece of it once, and he said it had more roots than he expected, that it was difficult walking. Did you find that, or did
it was very, very difficult walking. My friend, who had been a guide in the West and Jackson Hole Mountain Park and a lot of other places, said he never would have come if he'd realized how treacherous the trail is. Okay. It's not like walking the towpath. It's rocks. Much of it's, when you get to New England, it's almost always both hands and both feet. Not technical rock climbing, but you got to pull yourself up and lower yourself down. And it's not. If I get permission, I'm going to start the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a walk in the park compared to the Appalachian Trail.
Wow.
But I don't have permission yet.
Well, really, congratulations on that. That's really amazing. Yeah. I'm glancing down the questions that have come in, and they're all about government and politics. So I'm going to segue to that because that's really where a lot of the interest is. But we're very glad to hear about that. When I first heard about your Appalachian Trail, I thought, well, does he ever sleep? I mean, you have major day job, and but then I hear about everything else you're doing, so I guess that was
Yeah.
just a piece of it. So congratulations on that. Okay, let me take some of the questions that are here. First question from Lynn is, as a business person, a former ambassador, and an elected official, what do you think is the appropriate role of tariffs?
Oh, I hate tariffs, and I will be among those fighting tariffs for the next couple of months, couple of years. The naive part that our president-elect talks about is how other countries pay for the tariffs, which is just simply not true. If you know, my company, Global whatever, is going to buy something from Japan, and there's a $2 million tariff on it or a $2,000 tariff on it, I pay the tariff, and then I try to pass it on to the people that I'm selling the products to. So it's very inflationary. It also has the effect of, to the extent that it protects non-competitive businesses here in the United States, it allows them, first we get they can sell more stuff, but then they need more workers, which means it drives up labor prices in the United States, which is also inflationary. So the notion that somehow Donald Trump can pay for all of his tax cuts with tariffs is terrible economics. I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with Mark Zandi, who's the lead economist for Moody's. And he said, I'm quoting, 98% of the economists in America would say tariffs are bad public policy, and the other two are out there on the fringe. I chaired a joint economic committee hearing in December where we invited in 2 Democratic economists and 2 Republican economists, and it was 3-1 against tariffs. And the one that was for them, I don't know, it just didn't make any sense.
Thank you. Lynn asked the question, how do you coordinate and collaborate with the U.S. senators from Virginia and other congressional representatives from Virginia and Washington and even Maryland, the DMV? How do you coordinate with them?
Yeah, really very well. It's a great question, Louise. To the best of my knowledge, Virginia is the only state delegation that meets together, Democrat, Republican, House, and Senate every single month. I have a lunch tomorrow. Rob Whitman, the Republican from Virginia's 1st District, is buying lunch. I bought lunch last month. And so we get together, from 12 to 1 and talk about, a lot of it's gossip, but it's always an opportunity to work together on things that, benefit everybody, whether it's, an investment in the NASA facilities down in Newport News, or we all came together trying to get the FBI to come to Springfield. There'll be a lot of work, I think, trying to protect the federal employees, including from our Republican friends, because people like Rob Whitman, Ben Klein, they have a lot of federal employees also, and we do a lot of work across the border, the DMV. The Chris Van Hollens and Steny Hoyers, Jamie Raskins, all those folks. We have to work really close together because the region, we are a region. Occasionally, we get in competitive things. There's a big competitive thing over the FBI, which for the moment, Maryland has won. But in the meantime, Donald Trump may try to move it to Alabama anyway. So we don't know where it's ultimately going.
Yeah. Another question from Rebecca, is your position on the House Joint Economics Committee? Question mark. I don't know exactly sure what that means. Are there other House committees that you are slated to join in this section? Or I'll expand it to, are there ones that you would like to be a part of, specific committees?
Yeah, so I will keep my seat on House Ways and Means Committee, which I really value. Remarkably, there are very few people in Congress with a business background, even very few on the Ways and Means Committee, having struggled with budgets and profit and personnel issues, and for 46 years, I think that brings a really important perspective to this. There are very few economics majors there. I was economics at Williams, and did well there. But so I think that's really important. Also, Ways and Means is where all the tax policy happens, all the trade policy, including tariff, happens, and Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. They're really big, important things. But I also serve on the Joint Economic Committee. This is bipartisan and bicameral. So the leadership of it changes every Congress from the Senate to the House and back. So 2 years ago, I got to chair it for 2 years, which I loved. And we spent the whole 2 years just trying to do deep dive on income inequality and wealth inequality and how you overcome that. It was wonderful fun because I discovered that I could call Nobel Prize winning economists across the country and get them to spend an hour with us on the phone on Friday afternoon or a Zoom, just giving us the best ideas. And so much of what happened during COVID came out of that Joint Economic Committee. The last 2 years, it was chaired in the Senate. It came back to the House, but I'm in the minority. So my friend Dave Schweikert, who's a Republican from Phoenix, will chair it the next 2 years. But it's intended to be the congressional equivalent of the Council of Economic Advisors. It goes back to 1946. It's wonderful fun. I would love to get back on the Science Committee because of my interest in fusion and many other things. I was on it for 8 years and chaired the Space Subcommittee, but when we lost the majority, you go from having 25 members to 17 members, and so off I went. And I hope to get back on, but don't expect to until and unless we take back the majority.
How much of a role does it have on what a given congressperson or senator would like to do? I mean, do you put forth, geez, this is what I would like to be on, or is it strictly done separate from you?
No, it's very much your preference. For the first time, I'm serving on the steering committee, so we have 9 new freshmen from the greater region, from New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. People like Suhas Subramanian from Loudoun County, Gene Vidman from Prince William County, Sarah McBride from Delaware. So my job tonight, in fact, from 7:30 probably till 10 o'clock, will be to try to get them on the committees that they want to be on. First choice, like Gene Vidman really wants to be House Armed Services because he was a career Army officer. Nellie Poe from New Jersey really wants to be on transportation infrastructure because there's so much infrastructure going on in New Jersey, things like that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So you do have a role in that.
Yeah,
Okay.
very much so. Yeah.
And
And then
people also
hopefully
say that-
when you get on the committees that you really like, you stay on them because that's the way you build seniority.
Right. We have one question from Peter, and he asks, do you have any observations, personal or otherwise, regarding the 4 years spent in the Carter administration? Or, about, I guess it's about Carter and observations about him and the way he did business, and of course his character.
Yeah,
comes
I
out
mean,
too.
my wife and I went to the funeral on Thursday,
Mhm.
which was, I was like, geez, we got to get it. We have to leave for the bus at 7 a.m, but it was a wonderful service. I'm so glad I went. Terrific music, but just listening to the various eulogies, whether it's the one Jerry Ford and Walter Mondale wrote before they died, to James Carter's really wonderful remembrances of his father. Jimmy Carter, a complicated guy. I thought Stu Eisenstadt's eulogy, which has been repeated by many different people in op-eds, really said it best, that there are so many things that Jimmy Carter did well that have lasted a long, long time. For the deregulation of the airline industry so we can fly cheaply, to reminding us that there really was an environmental crisis. My goodness, if we'd stayed with it instead of abandoning it all those years. On the other hand, he's widely regarded, despite all the major things he passed, he was still considered a bad politician. But he did a lot of brave things. I thought one of the most, he lost that election for a variety of reasons, but probably the most important was because those of us on this call are old enough to remember what inflation and interest rates were like. And yet he appointed Paul Volcker, who had inflation was high, who promised to push those interest rates way up to 20% in order to bring inflation down. And that was among the major causes of Carter's loss. And he did bring inflation way down, and that was good for our economy all through the 1980s. The other piece was the the Shah fell from power. Well, we got him out of the country. The takeover by the mullahs, the Ayatollah, and not being able to effectively eliminate that, but he did a lot of very wonderful things, and of course, he didn't want to be remembered as the best ex-president. He wanted to be remembered for all the good things he did as president too.
Yeah. I saw the funeral too. I thought it was absolutely perfect, the eulogies. So it was wonderful. Lynn asked a question about TikTok, and she says, why is TikTok's access to user information worse than US-owned social media access to that same information? Is Congress working on privacy and consent provisions for all such applications?
That's a very good question. And I confess, I still have some ambivalence. I voted for the TikTok sale requirement, which we understand not as a TikTok ban, but just right now, it's widely reported that at the upper echelons of TikTok in China are Politburo members of the Chinese Communist Party. So the concern, as expressed by people like Mark Warner, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Mike Turner, the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and others, is that we are giving so much information about American people and children, especially, to the Chinese communists for their long-term use that we just can't have that. I know Donald Trump's trying to stop it. The perfect world is that they would sell it to Americans and TikTok would continue. What's not clear, what apparently is magical about TikTok is its algorithms, but it's not at all clear that the Chinese leadership would let the algorithms go with any sale. However, I think, is it Lynn's direct question? Is yes, we have totally missed the mark with not regulating our privacy on our own social media. Essentially, the business model is to take our private information and to sell it. And it's terrible that we haven't done anything about that. Kathy McMorris Rodgers, a Republican from Spokane, Washington, who just retired, sadly, had the first meaningful privacy bill in American history in the last Congress, and was very close to getting it passed. It was bipartisan. It had very strong support. And for some reason, the major social media companies were able to get to top Republican leadership and kill it. Very sad. The blueprint's written and we need to bring it back. And that's just a first step. Ultimately, we need to make sure that we are controlling our information from the very minute that we log on to Facebook or Meta or TikTok or anything else. And there's some really interesting ideas out there about putting our personal information, age and income and address and everything else into blockchain, so that you know who's taking it and moving it where, maybe even monetizing it. But we have been completely derelict in our attempts to regulate social media, beginning and most importantly with its control of our own private information.
Thank you.
By the way, there's after some of the incursions, Chinese and Russian hacks on the Hill, they tried to up our personal cybersecurity and signed us up for an app called Delete Me, DELETEME. And what it does is you put in your email addresses and it shows you all the different data mining companies, data brokers that are selling your information around the world. And it's hundreds just for my one email address. And then you can delete some of them and knock some of them off. But when you actually look at how much Louise Kenny or no assignment information is out there being sold, it's scary and discouraging.
Don't tell me. Kate asked the question. She says, let's be a little political, like what an opening that is, right? Many activists feel disaffected by the incoming administration that is not focused on priority human needs. Incoming leaders promise to eviscerate women's health care cut school lunches for needy kids, destroy the Department of Education, cut Obamacare, et cetera. How do you encourage people to stay hopefully engaged? How do you stay in touch with the real life concerns of your rank and file constituents? There are two parts to it, really. How do you
Yeah, yeah. So how do you the second half of it, and we've really spent, my team and I, a lot of time thinking about where I need to be in 2025, 2026. Because so many people are reasonably anxious about what's coming. I mentioned we've met with the leaders, but we have to meet with lots more people to try to chart ways forward that we can resist as appropriate in our communities, how we can fill in the gaps, how we can mitigate the damage. Just looking at Northern Virginia, if you take our percentage of immigrants without papers that are deported, that could have a huge impact on our schools, on our workforce. Already, the school superintendents are talking about the kids who won't come to school because they're afraid that their presence will lead them to their parents or even to them. What's that doing to people who've been abused or want to report a crime that are afraid to show up because they don't have papers? And then there's the whole issue of Jody Arrington, who's the Republican chair of the Budget Committee. You may have read the other day that he presented a whole list of things that he thought could get the budget back in balance. Slashing Medicaid. Virginia is a Medicaid expansion state, so there are tens of thousands of Northern Virginians who will lose their health insurance with that. Slashing the Affordable Care Act premium, the benefit that cuts the cost of that premium. They want to get rid of that. That will make Affordable Care Act, which right now is 24 million, the most it's ever been in American history. That can knock 4 million Americans off of Affordable Care Act. The whole is just sort of piece by piece. They in the last budget, they attempted to cut Title I funding by 80%. Well, Title I funding is almost all the schools along the Route 1 corridor south of the Beltway. Almost all the schools in Bailey's Crossroads are Title I funded. And so it's going to hit the poorest and the kids who probably need the most help at school right directly, and on and on. And all we can do is just try to fight back one day at a time, one battle at a time, and preserve it as best we can. And also have the confidence that what Trump does and what he says he wants to do and what he can actually get done are often very different. We have right now a 219 to 215 House, 4 seats. So 2 people are missing, or 2 people switch votes, and it doesn't happen. When Mike Waltz and Elaine Stefanik leave on the next Monday, it'll be 217 to 215. That's extraordinarily difficult to get major legislation that destroys people's lives through. So yes, Trump can do a lot with executive action, and we still have a filibuster in the Senate. I can't tell you bad things aren't going to happen, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we minimize the damage, and then get ready to try to elect more enlightened people in 2 years.
Let's hope. Patricia asked the question, the Department of Government Efficiency is not a federal entity. How can Musk and Ramaswamy get away with telling ICE what to do and who to deport? They were not elected, and they are not actually, and they do not have any actual power to do these things.
Now, all they can do is make recommendations, and to the extent that they're giving orders, there will be lawsuits or injunctions all over the country. One of the things we did see with Trump in the first term is that even though he's not a especially good law abider, they did respect almost all of the federal court injunctions. They will try to hurry them up. One of the best things that Biden did was get more judges confirmed than I think any president in history, trying to build a back wall of, reasonable people who believe in the law, not liberal Democrats, but people who just want the rule of law to prevail. So we'll and DOJ, who knows? I mean, I expect very, very little from DOJ. They set themselves a ridiculous goal, $2 trillion worth of cuts. They seem to miss the fact that virtually no American wants to cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. Even Donald Trump warns his people not to do that. And most people don't think we can slash the military given the dangerous world in which we live, when whether we like it or not, we are still the world's policemen. And yet you're now talking 90 to 91% of the federal budget. So how are you going to cut the other $2 trillion out of the last 9%? And that last 9% is everything else. Department of Justice, FBI. Education is only 12,000 people. Out of 2 million federal employees, by the way, 70% are either military or defense or national security. 70%. So, I heard Mike Johnson in his triumphant take the gavel speech last week say they're going to fire millions of federal employees. It's like, first of all, it's only 2 million to begin with. And second of all, 70%, I know you don't want to touch.
Yeah. So just circumstances alone will not allow some of these programs to go through, just facts.
Well, Louise, one of the biggest challenges I have, a normal person to have as in Congress, is how hard it is to get things done. I loved the 8 years I was in the Virginia Senate, where we would pass 1,000 short bills every year. Really incremental change. Here, there are very few little bills. If you get something passed, you introduce a really great bill on fusion and hope it's part of some big omnibus, bill on the continuing resolution or something. But the flip side of that is it also makes it difficult for people that want to tear down government to do it, because things move slowly.
Good from that perspective. You'd mentioned the fusion again here. I'm trying to see who's asking this question. Carol's asking the question, other than the development of fusion, what legislation can you work on to help mitigate climate change?
Lots and lots. Thanks for the question. When I ran for the first time 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I wanted to have one message, and that message would be that I will be the strongest, clearest voice fighting climate change that I can be. I'm one of 435, but and my team is, every one of us is completely oriented around the climate change challenge. So for example, it was my legislation in the Inflation Reduction Act that created a direct air capture tax credit, $180 for every ton of carbon we take out of the air. At the time, there were 3 companies in America trying to do direct air capture, which is taking the carbon out of the atmosphere that we spent the last 400 years dumping in, burning coal and oil and other things. Right now, there are 200 startups in America trying to take advantage of the direct air tax credit. Also in that bill, I got the 30% tax credit for buying an electric vehicle, commercial vehicle. It was $7,500 for the cars, but it was limited by how much income you had and the price of the car. This 30% is any commercial vehicle that's EV. It doesn't have a domestic content requirement. So that's exploded too. Right now, one of the big challenges with fracking is the amount of methane that escapes from the wells. It comes up the side and just goes out. And methane, we most think about it in terms of cow flatulence, but it is a much worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So I'm a lead with a Republican from Colorado. He and I are co-leading a bill to use satellites to monitor all the methane emissions so that you can go right back and say, look, here's a well in East Texas that's throwing out methane. It's got to be capped. The methane's got to be captured, and finding ways to measure it so that you can change it. And I'll stop there, but there's another 40 climate change things that we're working on, from coastal resilience to, I've been leading the whole effort on perennial food crops. There's a wonderful thing called the Land Institute in Salinas, Kansas, that's been working on the fact that almost all of our food crops are annual. It means you got to plant them every year and you turn over the soil every year and you get lots of soil loss and the roots aren't very deep. And yet everything in nature is perennial. Trees and weeds and the bushes. And you hike through the Appalachian Trail, all you see nobody's planting those plants every year. They're just there. And they have very deep roots and they're very good at carbon storage and they're very good at soil retention. So the Land Institute is trying to develop food crops that are perennial and that also that aren't monoculture. where everything's corn or everything's soybeans. You can grow things together the way things grow in nature. It was polycultural rather than monocultural.
That's
I'm
great.
sorry, you can be going, Louise. There's
No,
so many
that's
different
very
things
interesting.
that
Because people tend to
can make
think
a
there are three
difference.
or four things. Yeah, so that's great. Here's a non-issue specific. How do you balance supporting your district interest with supporting the national interest, especially when they conflict?
Uh, the nice part is they rarely conflict. I feel incredibly spoiled because I live closer than anybody to and my grandkids are fourth generation Northern Virginian. My grandparents, I started mentioning my grandmother being Francis Perkins' right hand. Well, my grandfather was, in the war cabinet. Another grandfather was career lawyer at Interior. So, so I grew up in this political milieu, and so I end up serving the most politically sophisticated congressional district in the country. There's nothing that compares with Virginia's 8th, the most educated too, by the way. So I've rarely seen a conflict. Here's one that is potentially conflict. We were very hit hard by the $10,000 cap on the state and local tax deduction from our income. This was part of Trump's Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and it really hurt all of our neighbors in Northern Virginia because most of us are paying way more than $10,000 between our Virginia state income tax and our property tax on our home. So all we could deduct was $10,000. All the rest of it ended up being direct tax to us. Well, I've been part of the efforts to raise that $10,000 or to get rid of it, but often feeling conflicted because most of that money, if we raise the cap again, is going to go back to the wealthiest people in the country. And it's not going to help our income inequality or the wealth inequality. I just happen to represent one of the wealthiest jurisdictions in the country. 5 of the top 10 wealthiest cities, counties in America are Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William. 5 of the 10 are right here. So we do get hit really hard by it. At the same time, I have a national responsibility to worry about all the people this economy has left behind.
Madeline has she says, no question, but a shout out to our current government efficiency. I applied for my passport renewal online and it was completed and sent to me in less than 3 weeks. So there you go.
That's
There's
great.
good news there too,
Yeah,
right?
it's come a long way. We have a ways to go. One of the big disappointments was the Internal Revenue Service because phones weren't getting answered, letters weren't getting answered. And then we put $80 billion in one of the Biden bills to really strengthen it over a 10-year period of time. It's been cut back 20 billion and then 10 billion more, which is hurting. But all that extra hiring the extra people meant number one, that you could get your questions answered, and number two, that the real challenge with the IRS is not us. If you get a W-2 or a 1099, 99% of the people pay their taxes on time. If you get income other ways, the tax gap is somewhere between 450 billion and $1 trillion every year. Now that means, and those are the people at the top end. That's not, by the way, raised taxes. Those are taxes that are currently due that are just evaded, not by using a tax shelter, which is legal, but just evaded illegally. But the problem is you get one poor IRS examiner and he's going up against a bevy of the best tax lawyers and tax accountants in Manhattan or Washington, D.C. It's not a fair fight.
Yeah. Gene has the question, are you concerned that Meta will no longer fact check and that Elon Musk has such a large platform for his dubious claims on X? The Washington Post ? What would you suggest to counter this misinformation so that voters have better information when needed to push back?
Louise, my only hope, and this sounds Pollyanna-ish, is that the rest of us in a community of people who believe in rationality and thought and the truth and education is that we can fight back with all the other tools that we have. One of my favorite bills I've been sponsoring for 5 or 6 years now is built on the Finnish model of training children from K through 12 in basically testing everything. In basically what they call digital literacy, but it's really literacy writ large. And just because you read it once doesn't mean it's true, that we need to test, test, test. Now, on Elon Musk, what worries me is his $400 billion. Not so much X. X is falling apart. It's becoming more and more sensible people are abandoning it and going other places, not just blue sky, but lots of other places. And it's becoming weirder and weirder. And I think it's becoming progressively irrelevant. Meta is different. Although my children tell me they don't know anybody under 40 that's on Facebook. Anybody, they're using completely different mechanics right now. But just it's embarrassing to see people that rich and that successful bending their knee to a president, whatever president that is. It would be embarrassing to see them do it to a Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. The pouring the money in and changing everything. I don't know what to say on the fact checkers and moving the people responsible for any content to Texas. I think in every victor, within every victory are the seeds of their next defeat. And I'm enough of an optimist to believe that history has a direction and it's generally a good direction, but there's lots of ups and downs, and that we just have to hang in there for the long term. And there are going to be great disappointments. The way the Post is being run right now, for example, extraordinarily disappointing. But we didn't cancel our subscription because we want to support the good reporters who have stayed there.
So I have now, it's about almost 10 after 10 after 4, and I understand you have to be in Washington at 5 o'clock ish. We'll take one more question. And I have one here that I'd like to pose, but you'd have to give your top of mind answer because it's such a big question. How do we overcome wealth inequality? Top 3 things that you can suggest.
Number one, taxation. I think taxation of the very wealthy. When most of us were growing up, the marginal tax rates were 90%. When I started keeping the books at the dealership, Don Beyer Volvo, the first 50,000 were taxed at whatever, and beyond that, it was taxed at 75 and 78%. Now we're down at 21%, and the effective tax rate on corporations is 8%. So, when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act last time, back in December 17, an enormous amount of that went just to stock buybacks. It didn't go to be invested in research and development. It didn't go to lifting up people's salaries. So that would be number one place I'd start. Number 2 is proclaiming a living wage. I got to serve in Switzerland for 4 years. I was the Obama 1 ambassador to Switzerland. And the Marines are the ones who maintain security at the embassy. And the Marines always have a Toys R Us program at every U.S. embassy in the world, except for Switzerland, because they couldn't find any poor children to give the toys to. When I left June of 2013, the minimum wage in Switzerland was $48,000 a year. And that was almost 12 years ago. So there just weren't homeless people. There were very few people in prison. They spent very little on correction costs. We send 7 million Americans to prison every year. Not all of them stay. Some are out overnight, and some are out in 3 months. Our priorities are completely wrong. Now, it did cost a lot more to go to McDonald's there. We learned quickly you didn't eat out a lot, because when you have to pay your cooks and your waiters and stuff, a minimum wage that was $48,000, other things would be more expensive, but everybody gained. You could afford apartments, you could afford to buy a house, you could afford to buy a car. And when you have Google it, but when you have the top 1% owning so much, or just take it, the top two people, Jeff Bezos and Musk, have more wealth than the bottom 50% of Americans combined, all combined. I'm not a Bernie person, but there's something wrong with a society where we have more than 1,000 billionaires. So Louise, economics class 101. One of the very first things we learn is the law of the diminishing marginal returns. That first ice cream cone is delicious. The second one's okay, but the fourth one you want to throw up. What's the difference for somebody that has a net worth of $10 million and a net worth of $11 million? Nothing. The marginal propensity in their happiness, the difference. Are they going to live longer? No. Are they going to be happy? Nothing. And yet we have people who have made the accumulation of wealth to the extent of impoverishing everyone else. Now, how you get there, we have to be done carefully, because we also know that the communist experiment clearly does not work. But we can there's lots and lots of little steps that we can make to bring us closer to where we are. Well, let's just start higher education. The fact that it is unaffordable for so many, many, many Americans. Back to Switzerland, what it costs to go to University of Zurich, University of Geneva, ETH was $1,000 a year. So a 4-year college education costs you $4,000. That's very different from my daughter who went to Rice, or my daughter who went to Brown, right? Or a Virginia child who goes to Christopher Newport or UVA or Virginia Tech.
I said
These
that was
are
going to be a quick
meaningful things
presentation.
we can do that would change the landscape of our country.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for being here with us today. It was an interesting presentation. I personally am glad to know you personally somewhat, in terms of you sharing what you've done, and both professionally, but also in terms of your many varied interests. So congratulations on the Appalachian Trail. That was a major accomplishment. Congratulations on going for your master's. That's quite an endeavor. So we look forward to hearing your continuing educational career as you move.
I miss the Appalachian Trail. I'm still in postpartum depression. I don't have any friends anymore.
I did want to remind everybody that you are having a town hall this Thursday from 7 to 8:30. It will be live streamed on your website, and also it will take place live if you'd like to go to at Yorktown High School. So everybody think about if you can go there. That would be great. Also, this is being recorded, so if you want to share this with anybody, please do share it with you. And we'll also have a survey at the end, so please do check out our survey, because we really count on your input. So thank you very much. Welcome to the neighborhood in Old Town North, which is where I live. I'm happy to have you here. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Louise. Thank you,
Congressman.
Laura. Thanks all of you for hanging in there.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye. Bye.